The bell above the glass door of the McDonald's chimed, a tiny, cheerful sound that was immediately swallowed by the noise inside. The place was a bubble of controlled chaos, filled with the sharp, salty smell of frying potatoes and the sweet, sugary scent of syrup. The air hummed with the constant sizzle from the grills, the insistent beeping of timers, and the overlapping chatter of dozens of conversations. A toddler in a high seat let out a happy shriek, waving a half-eaten chicken nugget like a scepter, while his parents laughed and tried to wipe ketchup off his cheek. At a nearby table, a teenager had headphones on, her fingers flying across her phone screen, completely lost in her own world. It was a normal, busy afternoon, a snapshot of everyday life. Then, the door chimed again, and this time the tiny sound seemed to cut through the noise, if only for a second. A man stepped inside, and the entire atmosphere of the room shifted. It wasn't a dramatic change, nothing you could point to, but it was there, like a sudden drop in temperature. He was a figure that seemed to be woven from neglect and long, hard days. His coat was a dark, heavy thing, once perhaps a respectable overcoat, but now it was frayed at the cuffs and stained with who knows what. A threadbare scarf was wrapped loosely around his neck, and his hair, a matted mess of dark and gray curls, poked out from under a dirty wool hat. His face was a roadmap of hardship. A thick, wild beard obscured most of his features, but his eyes were visible, and they were the most striking part. They weren't aggressive or demanding. They were just tired. A deep, profound kind of tiredness that went far beyond a lack of sleep. It was the weariness of someone who had seen too much and expected too little. He moved slowly, each step seeming to require a great deal of thought and effort. His worn-out boots scuffing softly against the clean, tiled floor as he made his way through the restaurant. It was as if he were parting an invisible sea. People didn't mean to be cruel, but their reactions were instinctive. A businessman in a crisp suit who was scrolling through his emails subtly pulled his leather briefcase a little closer to his side. A mother, who was buckling her youngest child into a stroller, put a protective hand on the stroller's handle and gave the man a quick, nervous glance before turning her attention back to her baby, her movements becoming a little more hurried. A group of high school students, who were laughing loudly at a video on one of their phones, suddenly went quiet. They didn't look at him directly, but their eyes darted towards him and then away, their laughter dying in their throats. He was a ghost, and yet everyone was painfully aware of his presence. Behind the counter, the staff exchanged a look that was a mixture of resignation and weary caution. They had seen people like him before. It was part of the job in a downtown location. The manager, a man with a stressed face and a perpetually furrowed brow, wiped his hands on his apron and gave the newcomer a quick, assessing look. He wasn't seeing a person. He was seeing a potential situation. Someone who might ask for money, who might fall asleep, who might cause a scene that would disrupt the carefully managed flow of business. He made a small, almost imperceptible nod to one of his crew. A signal to be ready. The young woman working the cash register didn't look up. She was in the middle of a complicated order for a family of 6. Her mind racing to keep track of who wanted what, no pickles, extra sauce. A toy for the girl's happy meal, her smile was painted on. A mask of customer service that didn't quite reach her eyes. Her feet ached, and the constant beeping of the order screen was starting to feel like a drill in her skull. She was just trying to get through her shift, one transaction at a time. The man didn't go to the counter. He didn't approach anyone. He just shuffled through the aisle, his gaze lowered, as if he were trying to make himself as small as possible. He seemed to be searching for something, and after a moment, he found it, an empty booth in the far corner of the restaurant tucked away from the main flow of traffic. The vinyl of the seat was cracked and peeling, and the table still had a few sticky spots from its last cleaning, but it was a refuge. It was a place to sit. He lowered himself into the booth, a process that seemed to take a great deal of effort, as if his bones were made of lead. The cracked vinyl of the seat sighed under his weight. Once he was settled, he didn't look around. He didn't watch the people or the TV screen mounted on the wall, which was playing a news channel with the sound off. He just stared down at the tabletop in front of him, his hands resting on his lap, hidden beneath the table. He was a statue carved from fatigue, a solitary island in the middle of a bustling, noisy ocean. People continued with their meals, their conversations, their lives, but the man in the corner remained still, a silent, invisible presence in a room full of life. He was there, and yet, to everyone else, he wasn't there at all. He was just part of the background, a piece of urban scenery to be ignored. The minutes ticked by, each one feeling a little heavier than the last. The man in the corner booth remained a still, silent figure, a rock in the stream of hurried activity flowing around him. He didn't fidget or look for distraction. He simply sat, his gaze occasionally drifting up to watch the swirl of life before him, but always returning to the worn surface of the table. He was an observer, taking in the small, unspoken dramas that played out in the fast food restaurant every single day, behind the counter. The young woman's shift was entering that difficult part of the afternoon where the initial rush had faded, but the tiredness was really starting to set in. The smile she had pasted on her face at the beginning of her shift now felt like a brittle mask, ready to crack at any moment. Her feet throbbed inside her non-slip shoes, a dull, persistent ache that traveled up her legs and settled in her lower back. Every time the order screen beeped with a new request, it felt like a tiny electric shock, a new demand on her already depleted energy. She was running on autopilot, her hands moving with practiced efficiency, scooping fries, filling drink cups, assembling burgers with the speed of someone who had done it 1,000 times. Her mind, however, was starting to drift. She thought about the test she had to study for, the pile of laundry waiting at home, the phone call she needed to return to her mom. It was a constant juggling act, and she felt like she was dropping all the balls. That's when he walked up to the counter. He was a man in his late 40s, dressed in a tailored suit that looked expensive and a crisp white shirt that was already showing signs of a long day. He had a phone pressed to his ear, and he held up a single, impatient finger to the young woman, a universal signal for wait. She did, standing there with a neutral expression, while the line behind him grew a little longer. The man finished his call with an abrupt, "I have to go, call me back," and snapped his phone shut. He turned his full, undivided attention to her, and his face was a mask of irritation. "Finally," he said, his voice sharp and laced with condescension. "I was starting to think no one was working back here." The young woman's smile tightened. "I'm sorry about the wait, sir. What can I get for you today?" He rattled off his order, speaking quickly and not making eye contact, as if she were just a machine he was programming. "A Big Mac, no pickles. A large fries, make sure they're fresh. And a large black coffee. And it better be hot this time." He added the last part with a pointed look. She nodded, keying the order into the screen with quick, precise taps. "Okay, so that's 1 Big Mac with no pickles, 1 large fries, and 1 large black coffee. Will that be all for you?" He sighed, a long, dramatic sound of exasperation. "Yes, that's all. It's not that complicated, is it?" She fought the urge to roll her eyes. "That'll be $12.47, please." He paid with a flick of his credit card, tapping it impatiently on the reader. As he waited for his order, he stood to the side, his arms crossed, his foot tapping in nervous, aggressive rhythm on the floor. He watched her every move, his gaze critical and unwavering. She could feel it on her back like a physical weight as she worked with another crew member to get his food ready. She made sure to personally drop the fries herself, scooping them from the basket the second it came up, steaming and golden. She carefully prepared his coffee, making sure it was fresh from the pot. She placed everything on the tray with extra care. "Order up," she called out, her voice as cheerful as she could make it. The man strode forward and snatched the tray from the counter. He glanced at the burger, then back at her. "You remembered no pickles?" he asked, his tone dripping with disbelief. "Yes, sir. No pickles, just like you asked." He grunted, a noncommittal sound, and carried his tray to a table. The young woman let out a small breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. She turned her attention to the next customer, forcing her tired smile back into place. But the encounter had left a bad taste in her mouth, worse than the old fry oil she had to clean off the station earlier. It wasn't just that he was rude. It was the way he had looked at her, as if she were invisible, or worse, as if she were stupid. It was a small interaction, but it was 1,000 little cuts, and she was starting to feel the blood drain away. A few minutes later, the man in the suit was back. He stormed up to the counter, the tray held in front of him like evidence. "Excuse me," he barked, his voice loud enough to turn a few heads. "I specifically said nitrogen monoxide pickles." The young woman's heart sank. She looked at the burger on the tray. Sure enough, peeking out from under the bun were the bright green slices of pickle. It was a mistake. A simple, stupid mistake. "I am so sorry, sir," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't know how that happened." "I'll make you a new one right away." "You don't know how that happened?" he repeated, his voice rising. "It's your one job. Is it really that difficult to follow a simple instruction? I'm on my lunch break. I don't have time for this incompetence." Her face grew hot with a mixture of shame and anger. She could feel the eyes of the other customers on her. She saw the manager poke his head out of the office, see what was happening, and then duck back inside, choosing to avoid the confrontation. The feeling of being alone, of being abandoned to face this man's wrath, was overwhelming. She wanted to defend herself, to say that she'd been working for 6 hours straight, that the kitchen was chaotic, that everyone makes mistakes. But she couldn't. The words were stuck in her throat. All she could do was stand there and take it. "Just give me a refund," the man demanded, slamming the tray down on the counter. "I've lost my appetite. This is ridiculous." She fumbled with the register, her fingers shaking so badly she could barely press the right buttons. She finally managed to process the refund, her hands feeling clumsy and useless. The man snatched the cash from her hand. "Hire people who can actually do their job," he said, his final, cutting remark. He turned and stormed out of the restaurant, leaving a trail of negative energy in his wake. The young woman stood there for a moment, frozen. The mask of customer service had shattered. The anger, the frustration, the humiliation, and the sheer exhaustion of the day all crashed down on her at once. A hard, painful knot formed in her throat, and her eyes started to burn. She quickly turned away from the counter, pretending to busy herself with wiping down an already clean surface. She didn't want anyone to see her. She just wanted to disappear. She bit down on her lip, hard, trying to keep the tears at bay, but it was no use. A single, hot tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek, followed by another. She wiped them away angrily, but they kept coming. It was just a burger, just a rude customer, but it felt like so much more. It felt like the weight of the entire world was pressing down on her shoulders. And in that moment she felt completely and utterly broken from his quiet corner booth. The man in the tattered coat had watched the entire scene unfold. He had seen the initial flash of anxiety in the young woman's eyes, the way she had tried to appease the man, the subtle slump of her shoulders as he berated her. He saw the manager's retreat, the other customers' averted gazes. He saw her standing there, alone, her composure finally cracking. He saw not an employee who made a mistake, but a person in pain. He saw a young woman trying her best, being beaten down by a world that could be cruel and unforgiving. And in his tired, world-weary eyes, a flicker of something new appeared. It was a spark of empathy, a quiet resolve. He slowly, deliberately, pushed himself away from the table, the cracked vinyl groaning in protest. It was time to move. The heavy glass door swung shut, the chime sounding almost like a final, judgmental gong. The man in the suit was gone, but his presence lingered in the air like a bad smell, a toxic cloud of anger and impatience that had poisoned the entire restaurant. For a moment, there was a strange lull in the usual fast food symphony. The sizzle of the grills and the hum of the drink machines seemed to fade into the background. The few customers who had witnessed the scene looked away, suddenly finding their own phones or meals intensely fascinating. It was an unspoken rule of public spaces. Don't get involved, don't stare, pretend you didn't see a thing. This unspoken rule left the young woman standing at the counter. Utterly and completely alone, she turned her back to the lobby, her movements stiff and robotic. She grabbed a gray cleaning rag from a dispenser and began to wipe down the stainless steel counter, her hand moving back and forth in a pointless, repetitive motion. The surface was already clean, but she needed something to do, something to occupy her hands and her mind. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, and a hot, prickly feeling of shame was crawling up her neck. She felt the sting of unshed tears behind her eyes and blinked rapidly, trying to force them back. Crying at work was the ultimate humiliation, a sign of weakness she couldn't afford to show. She took a deep, shaky breath, the air catching in her throat. The words the man had said echoed in her head. Incompetence. It's your one job. Each one was a little needle, pricking at her already fragile self-esteem. She had tried so hard to be good at this job, to be fast and efficient and friendly. But one mistake, one moment of distraction, and it had all come crashing down. She felt small, worthless, and invisible. From his quiet corner, the man in the tattered coat watched her. He saw the rigid set of her shoulders, the way her head was bowed, the frantic, almost desperate way she was wiping that already spotless counter. He had seen the whole ugly exchange. He had seen the man's face, twisted with contempt, and he had seen the young woman's face, a canvas of hurt and humiliation. He had seen the manager retreat and the other customers look away. In that moment, he saw a reflection of so many moments he had witnessed in his own life, people in pain being ignored by a world in too much of a hurry to stop and help. He felt a familiar ache in his chest, a deep sense of empathy for this struggling young woman. He had been on the receiving end of that kind of cruelty, that casual dismissal of one's humanity. He knew exactly how it felt. Slowly, deliberately, he pushed himself up from the cracked vinyl booth. The movement seemed to require a great deal of effort, his joints creaking in protest. He stood for a moment, a tall, stooped figure in his heavy, dirty coat, and then he started to walk towards the counter. His shuffling footsteps were soft on the tiled floor, but they seemed to command attention. The young woman, with her back turned, didn't hear him at first. But a couple at a nearby table did. They watched his approach, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and unease. What did this man want? Was he going to ask for money? Was he going to cause another scene? The tension in the air, which had just begun to dissipate, started to build again. The man reached the counter and stood a few feet back, a respectful distance. He didn't rap on the counter or clear his throat to get her attention. He just waited. The young woman, lost in her own miserable thoughts, finally sensed a presence. She straightened up, turned around, and forced a weak, watery smile onto her face. It was the mask she wore, the one that said, "I'm a professional. I'm fine. How can I help you?" But her eyes were red-rimmed, and her voice was shaky when she spoke. "Welcome to McDonald's," she recited, the words sounding hollow and distant. "Can I take your order?" The man looked at her, and his gaze was different from anyone else's. It wasn't pitying or judgmental or impatient. It was calm, and it was kind. His eyes, those tired, world-weary eyes, seemed to see right past her uniform and her name tag, past the painted-on smile and the lingering tears. He saw her. "There's just a small coffee, please," he said. His voice was a quiet rumble, surprisingly gentle and warm. She nodded, her fingers fumbling slightly as she reached for a small cup. "Okay, anything else for you today?" He paused for a moment, his gaze still fixed on her face. "Are you okay?" He asked Dot. The question was so simple, so unexpected, that it hit her like a physical blow. No one had asked her that all day. Not her manager, not her coworkers, not any of the hundreds of customers she had served. They saw a uniform, a function, a means to an end. But this man, this stranger who looked like he had nothing, saw a person who was hurting. The carefully constructed wall she had built around her emotions crumbled in an instant. The professional smile vanished, replaced by a look of raw vulnerability. Her lip began to tremble, and she couldn't stop it. A single, hot tear escaped and rolled down her cheek, leaving a glistening track. I'm fine," she mumbled, quickly turning away to hide her face, wiping at the tear with the back of her hand. She was mortified. Crying in front of a customer, she turned back to the coffee machine, her hands trembling as she placed the cup under the spout and pressed the button. The hiss of the hot coffee filling the cup was the only sound between them. She tried to focus on the simple task, on the dark liquid rising in the cup, but her mind was reeling. Who was this man? And why did his simple act of caring affect her so deeply? When the cup was full, she snapped a plastic lid on it and placed it on the counter. "That's $1.09, she said, her voice barely a whisper. The man nodded. He reached into his coat, not into a grimy pocket, but into the inner lining. He pulled out a wallet. It was a startling sight. The wallet was made of good, dark leather, and it was thick and clean, a stark contrast to the dirty, worn-out hand that held it. He opened it, and to her complete astonishment, pulled out a crisp, new $100 bill. He held it out to her. Her eyes went wide. "Sir, I can't take this," she stammered. "It's only $1." He didn't pull the bill back. He just looked at her with those kind, gentle eyes. "Keep the change," he said softly, his voice firm but kind. She just stared at the bill, then at him, completely bewildered. "But why?" A small, sad smile touched his lips. "For the next person who has a day like yours," he said. "Or for yourself. Get something that makes you smile. A nice dinner. A book? Whatever you want, just something for you." He pushed the bill a little closer to her. She hesitated for a second, her mind struggling to catch up. This was impossible. It didn't make sense. But there was something in his eyes, a sincerity that was undeniable. Slowly, her hand shaking, she reached out and took the money. The bill felt crisp and real in her fingers, a tangible symbol of an act of kindness so profound it was almost incomprehensible. The man gave her a final, reassuring nod, then turned and shuffled back to his corner booth, leaving her standing there, clutching the $100 bill as if it were a life raft. She watched him sit down, his back to her, a solitary figure once again. He didn't seem to want thanks or recognition. He had just done it, a quiet, anonymous act of generosity that had changed everything. She looked down at the money in her hand, then back at the man in the corner. The world suddenly felt different. The cruel words of the man in the suit faded away, replaced by the gentle, powerful question from a stranger who had seen her pain and decided, in his own quiet way, to do something about it. The $100 wasn't just money. It was a message. It said, "You are seen. You are valued. You matter." And in that moment, holding that piece of paper, she felt a glimmer of hope she hadn't felt in a very long time. The young woman stood frozen behind the counter, the crisp $100 bill clutched in her hand like a winning lottery ticket. It felt unreal, a piece of paper from a different world that had somehow materialized in her greasy, fast food-scented reality. Her eyes were fixed on the man in the corner booth. He was just sitting there, sipping his small coffee, his back to the rest of the restaurant, a hunched figure in a world of his own. He looked exactly the same as he had when he walked in a picture of poverty and exhaustion. But now he was something else entirely. He was a mystery, an enigma wrapped in a dirty coat. Who was he? Why would a man who looked like he needed every penny he could get give away $100 to a crying stranger he didn't even know? The question echoed in her mind, pushing away the lingering memory of the angry man in the suit. This new mystery was so much more powerful, so much more profound. She carefully folded the bill and slipped it into her pocket, her fingers brushing against it as if to make sure it was still there. It was a secret, a magical secret that she shared with the quiet man in the corner, and it made her feel a little less alone, a little less broken dot in a booth across the aisle. A college-aged boy was hunched over his laptop, the screen's blue light illuminating his face. He had been trying to finish a paper for hours, but the constant noise of the restaurant had made it impossible to focus. He had tuned out most of the drama, only vaguely aware of the shouting match at the counter. But now, something else had caught his attention. It was a feeling, a subtle shift in the atmosphere. He looked up from his screen, his eyes scanning the room. He saw the young woman wiping her eyes, looking dazed. He saw the other customers whispering to each other. And then he saw the man in the corner booth. There was something about him, something familiar that he couldn't quite place. The boy tilted his head, squinting. The man was turned away, but there was something in the set of his shoulders, the shape of his head, even the way he held the cheap paper coffee cup. It was a posture he had seen 100 times before. On a giant screen in a darkened theater, his heart started to beat a little faster. It couldn't be, could it? The man looked so different, so worn down. But the feeling of familiarity was overwhelming, a nagging itch at the back of his brain. The boy minimized his paper and opened a web browser, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He typed in a name that felt both crazy and obvious at the same time. Images filled the screen: the man in a black trench coat, the man with a thoughtful expression on a movie poster, the man smiling on a red carpet. He scrolled through the pictures, comparing them to the figure in the corner. The shape of the eyes, the line of the jaw, the way his hair fell, even beneath the dirt and the grime. It was him. It had to be him. The boy's mouth went dry. He was sitting in a McDonald's, and a movie superstar was sitting in the corner, disguised as a homeless man. It was the most unbelievable thing he had ever seen. He didn't know what to do. Should he shout his name? Should he ask for an autograph? A picture? No, that felt wrong. The man was clearly trying to be incognito, to have a quiet moment. Causing a scene would be a betrayal of whatever he was doing here. The boy took a deep breath, his mind racing. He had to know for sure, but he had to do it respectfully. He closed his laptop, slid it into his bag, and stood up. His legs felt a little shaky as he walked across the restaurant, his palms sweating. He reached the booth and stood there for a moment, gathering his courage. Then he leaned down, bringing his head close to the man's. "Excuse me," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the noise of the restaurant. The man didn't startle or turn around in surprise. He just slowly turned his head, his calm, tired eyes meeting the boy's nervous gaze. There was no fear, no alarm in his expression. Just a quiet, patient curiosity, as if he had been expecting this. The boy whispered a single question. A name into the man's ear. For a moment, the man just looked at him. His face, hidden behind the wild beard and matted hair, was impossible to read. Then a tiny, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. He didn't say a word. He just gave a slow, deliberate nod. It was a small gesture, but it was all the confirmation the boy needed. His eyes went wide with a mixture of shock and pure, unadulterated awe. He straightened up, his heart pounding in his chest. He nodded back, a silent acknowledgement of the secret they now shared, and quickly walked back to his table. The boy sat down, but he couldn't focus on anything. His mind was buzzing. He pulled out his phone, his fingers trembling with excitement as he typed a frantic message to his friend. "You will not believe who is in this McDonald's." He looked up at the man in the corner, who had already gone back to sipping his coffee as if nothing had happened. The boy couldn't keep it to himself. He turned to the couple sitting at the next table, a young man and woman who were scrolling through their phones together. "I'm sorry to bother you," he said, his voice low and urgent. "But look at this." He showed them a picture on his phone, then pointed discreetly towards the corner booth. The girl leaned over, her eyes following his finger. At first, she just saw a homeless man. Then she looked back at the phone, and her eyes went wide. A small gasp escaped her lips. "No way," she whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. Her boyfriend looked, his brow furrowed in disbelief. "It really is," he breathed. The whisper began to spread like a silent, electric current through the restaurant. The girl showed her phone to her friends. The couple at the next table overheard and started staring. A man who was waiting for his order noticed the sudden shift in attention and followed everyone's gaze to the corner booth. His jaw dropped. People started pulling out their phones, not to take pictures, but to search for the name they were now hearing passed from table to table in hushed, excited tones. The atmosphere had completely transformed. The indifference and awkwardness from before were gone, replaced by a palpable buzz of awe and disbelief. It was as if a celebrity had suddenly appeared in their midst, not with a flash of cameras and an entourage, but out of thin air like a magic trick behind the counter. The young woman was finally starting to calm down. She had taken a few deep breaths and was trying to get back to work, but she kept glancing at the $100 bill in her pocket. She overheard the whispers, the repeated name that was being passed around like a secret code. At first, she didn't pay much attention, but then she heard it again, clearer this time, from a group of teenagers who were pointing and staring. She looked in their direction, and one of them, a girl with bright pink hair, turned her phone around to show her friend. On the screen was a picture of a handsome, familiar-looking man with a kind smile. The young woman's eyes followed the girl's pointing finger across the restaurant. Past the tables of whispering customers, to the lone figure in the corner booth, she looked at the man in the dirty coat, the man with the tired eyes and the gentle voice. She looked at the picture on the girl's phone, and suddenly it all clicked into place. The familiar shape of his face, the kindness in his eyes, the quiet, humble way he had moved through the world. It was him. The name she was hearing was his name. The $100 bill wasn't just an act of random kindness from a stranger. It was an act of profound generosity from one of the most famous people on the planet. Her world tilted on its axis, and she was left standing there, her hand over her mouth, staring in utter, complete, and beautiful disbelief. The name hung in the air, a silent, electric whisper that connected every person in the room. It was a name that belonged on movie screens and magazine covers, a name associated with futuristic battles and romantic comedies, a name that represented a certain kind of quiet, thoughtful stardom. And now that name was attached to the man in the tattered coat, the man who had been sitting silently in the corner, the man who had just performed an act of profound, unexpected kindness. The entire restaurant was caught in a strange, suspended state of disbelief. No one shouted, no one rushed forward. It was as if they were all afraid that if they made a sudden move, the magical, impossible moment would shatter like glass. The young woman behind the counter felt as if she were underwater. The sounds of the restaurant were muffled, distant. Her world had shrunk to the small space between herself and the man in the corner. She saw him not as a movie star, but as the person who had seen her pain when no one else had. The $100 in her pocket felt heavy, not with its monetary value, but with the weight of the humanity behind the gesture. It was a bridge between two completely different worlds, built in a moment of shared vulnerability. She watched as he calmly took another sip of his coffee, completely unfazed by the silent storm of awe that was swirling around him. He seemed to be in his own bubble of peace, a quiet center in a hurricane of shock. The manager finally emerged from his office, his face a mixture of annoyance and curiosity. He had heard the change in the restaurant's atmosphere, the shift from the normal hustle and bustle to something else, something charged with energy. "What's going on out here?" he started to say, his voice carrying its usual stressed tone. But then he saw it. He saw every customer in the place angled towards the same corner booth. He saw the phones held discreetly, the wide, disbelieving eyes. He followed their collective gaze and saw the homeless man, the one he had mentally categorized as a potential problem earlier, just sitting there. The manager looked at the young woman, his expression one of complete confusion. She just shook her head, a small, almost imperceptible motion. Unable to find the words to explain the impossible, the man in the corner, the one they all now knew as a global superstar, seemed to sense that his time was up. He had finished his small coffee. He placed the empty cup carefully on the table as if not wanting to leave a mess. Then, with the same slow, deliberate movements he had made when he entered, he began to stand up. The room seemed to hold its collective breath. As he rose to his full height, even in his slumped, weary posture, he had a presence that was undeniable. He pulled the frayed coat around him, a simple, familiar gesture. He didn't look at anyone. He didn't acknowledge the whispers or the stares. He just prepared to leave, as if he were any other customer who had finished his meal, a path magically cleared for him. As he began to walk towards the exit, people subtly shifted in their seats, moving their bags and their legs to create an aisle for him. It wasn't a mob scene. It was a procession of silent respect. They were part of something now, witnesses to a moment of pure, unscripted humanity. The college boy who had first recognized him simply watched, a look of profound admiration on his face. He understood that this wasn't a photo opportunity. It was something sacred. The couple who had been shown the picture held hands, their eyes following him as he moved through the restaurant. They weren't seeing a celebrity. They were seeing a lesson in how to be a person. As he walked past the counter, he stopped. The young woman's heart leaped into her throat. He turned his head and his eyes found hers. The entire world seemed to disappear. There was no one else in the restaurant, no noise, no distractions. It was just the two of them standing on opposite sides of the counter. He didn't smile a big Hollywood smile. It was a small, gentle, genuine curve of his lips, the same smile he had given her before she knew who he was. It was a smile that said, "I see you. Your struggle is real. You are valuable." He didn't say a word. He just nodded once, a slow, deliberate nod of acknowledgement and respect. It was a gesture that was more powerful than any speech, more meaningful than any autograph. It was a final, silent gift meant only for her. Then he turned and walked to the door. The bell chimed as he pushed it open, and he stepped out into the cold night, disappearing into the city's glow as quietly as he had arrived. For a moment, no one moved. The door swung shut, and the silence that followed was heavy and thick. Then a wave of sound washed over the restaurant. It wasn't loud or chaotic. It was a collection of excited, hushed whispers of people turning to each other with wide eyes, asking, "Did you see that?" The story began to be retold, not as a celebrity sighting, but as an incredible act of kindness. "He gave her $100, someone whispered. "And he asked if she was okay," another person added. The focus wasn't on his fame. It was on his character. He had walked in as a homeless man and had left as an example of what it means to be human. The manager stood frozen for a moment, then walked over to the young woman. He looked at her, not as an employee who had made a mistake, but as a person who had just been part of something extraordinary. Are you okay?" he asked, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. She looked at him, and for the first time all day, a real, genuine smile spread across her face. It was a smile that reached her eyes, a smile that was full of a newfound strength and a deep, unshakable warmth. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I'm more than okay." She reached into her pocket and touched the crisp $100 bill. It was still there, a tangible reminder of the craziest, most beautiful moment of her life. But she knew now that the money was the least important part of it. The real gift was the feeling of being seen. The real gift was the reminder that in a world that could be harsh and uncaring, there were people who would stop, who would notice, and who would care. It was a lesson she would never forget. As she went back to work, her movements were no longer stiff and robotic. They were fluid, purposeful. The weight on her shoulders was gone, replaced by a feeling of lightness, of hope. The world hadn't changed, but she had. And in that moment, standing behind the counter of a busy McDonald's, she felt more powerful and more seen than she ever had before, left utterly, beautifully, and completely speechless.